You're just extra weight holding Marcus back from his real future. She said it with a smile, like she was discussing the weather. I felt something shatter inside me that day, but what I discovered later and what I did about it left her entire world in ruins. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. At 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of cruelty this world had to offer. I'd buried a husband 20 years ago, survived breast cancer twice, and raised my son Marcus through the kind of poverty that would have broken most people. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for Victoria Ashford. My name is Margaret Chen, and I live in a modest two-bedroom house in the quiet suburb of Bridgeport, just outside Seattle. It's the same house where I raised Marcus after his father died. The same house where he took his first steps and celebrated every birthday until he left for the University of Washington. The mortgage was finally paid off 5 years ago, and though the neighborhood has changed around me, young families moving in, old neighbors moving away, this little corner of the world remains mine. The house shows its age. The kitchen counters are original from 1985. The bathroom tiles are cracked in places I've learned to ignore. And the carpet in the living room is worn thin from decades of footsteps. But it's clean, it's mine, and it holds every memory of watching my son grow from a curious toddler into a successful man. Or at least, that's what I thought he'd become. Marcus had been working as a research coordinator at Seattle Medical Research Institute for 3 years when he started dating Victoria. He'd mentioned her casually at first during our weekly Sunday phone calls. A new colleague, brilliant scientist, published in important journals. His voice would brighten when he talked about her, and I was happy for him. After a difficult divorce 2 years earlier, he deserved someone who appreciated him. But I should have heard the warning signs in those early conversations. The way he mentioned her credentials before her personality, the way he talked about her connections in the medical research community with a mix of admiration and something else, something that sounded uncomfortably like ambition. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September when Victoria first walked into my life. Marcus had called that morning, his voice nervous and excited. "Mom, I know this is last minute, but Victoria and I are in Bridgeport running some errands. Could we stop by? She really wants to meet you." My heart had leaped with joy. My son wanted me to meet his girlfriend? That meant something serious, something real. I'd spent the morning in a flurry of activity, vacuuming, dusting, baking Marcus's favorite chocolate chip cookies from the recipe his grandmother had given me 50 years ago. I changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue cardigan and slacks that I hoped struck the right balance between presentable and comfortable. When the doorbell rang at 2:30, I checked my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror. My hair was still mostly black, though silver streaked through it more each year. My face showed every one of my 72 years. Laugh lines around my eyes, deeper creases around my mouth, the softness that comes with age. But my eyes were still bright, still sharp, and I smiled at my reflection. I was a mother about to meet her son's girlfriend. This was supposed to be a happy moment. I opened the door to find Marcus standing beside the most intimidating woman I'd ever seen in person. Victoria Ashford was tall, nearly 6 feet in her expensive-looking heels, with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that must have required professional styling. Her skin was flawless, the kind of porcelain complexion that spoke of regular spa treatments and products I couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that hung perfectly on her slim frame, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and carried a handbag I recognized from a magazine Marcus had left behind on his last visit, an Hermes Birkin that cost more than I'd made in a year when I was still working. But it was her eyes that struck me most. Cold, calculating blue eyes that swept over me in a single glance, cataloging and dismissing me in the same moment. Mrs. Chen, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand with nails painted a shade of nude that probably had some fancy French name. It's so lovely to finally meet you. Marcus has told me so much about you. I took her hand, noting how she barely made contact before pulling away, as if touching me might somehow transfer some of my ordinariness onto her pristine self. Her hand was cold, despite the warm autumn day. Please, call me Margaret, I said, stepping aside to let them in. Come in, come in. I just made some tea and cookies. Marcus followed behind Victoria, carrying several shopping bags from stores I'd only seen in the upscale mall across town. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, a boutique I didn't know the name of. My son had changed in the 8 months since I'd last seen him in person. His haircut was more expensive looking, styled with some kind of product that made it look artfully messy. He wore dark jeans that fit him too perfectly to be off the rack, and a sweater that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Even his shoes, casual leather loafers, screamed money in a way his old sneakers never had. He leaned down to kiss my cheek. His cologne was different too, something sophisticated and woody that I didn't recognize. Mom, I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced like this. Of course not, sweetheart. You know you're always welcome here. I gestured toward the living room, suddenly seeing it through Victoria's eyes. The worn sofa I'd reupholstered myself 10 years ago, the coffee table with the water ring I'd never been able to fully remove, and the bookshelf slagging slightly under the weight of paperbacks accumulated over decades. But it's clean, it's 9, and it holds every memory of watching my son grow from a curious toddler into a successful man. Or at least that's what I thought he'd become. Victoria perched on the edge of my sofa like a bird ready to take flight at any moment, her posture perfect, her coat arranged carefully so it wouldn't wrinkle. She didn't remove it, I noticed, despite the warmth of the house. Her eyes swept across the room with the precision of a home inspector, taking in every detail. The family photos on the mantel chronicling Marcus's childhood, the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the armchair, the slightly faded curtains that I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years now. What a quaint home, she said finally, her tone suggesting quaint was the politest word she could find. Very nostalgic, like stepping back in time. I smiled, though the comment stung more than it should have. I've been here since Marcus was 2. It holds a lot of memories. I can see that. Her gaze lingered on a photo of 5-year-old Marcus missing his 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera with chocolate smeared across his face. You've certainly preserved everything from the past. There was something in the way she said preserved that made it sound like I was running a museum of outdated things rather than living in a home full of love and history. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the armchair he'd claimed, the same chair he had always sat in during visits home. Mom, something smells amazing. I made your favorite cookies, I said, grateful for the change of subject. Let me get the tea. I hurried to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the cookies on my good plate, the one with the delicate flower pattern that had been a wedding gift from my own mother. The cookies had turned out perfectly, golden brown, with the chocolate chips still slightly melted. I'd made them with real butter, the way Marcus liked them, even though it was more expensive than the margarine I usually used. When I returned to the living room with the tray of tea and cookies, Victoria was examining her phone with the kind of intense focus that suggested whatever was on the screen was infinitely more interesting than anything in my home. Here we are, I said brightly, setting the tray on the coffee table. Marcus, I made them just the way you like them. My son's face lit up in a way that reminded me of the boy he used to be. Mom, these look incredible. Victoria, you have to try one. My mom makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. Victoria glanced up from her phone, her expression politely dismissive. Oh, how sweet. But I don't eat refined sugar. She said it the way someone might decline arsenic. It's absolutely terrible for your skin and overall health. The glycemic impact alone is devastating to your cellular structure. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes.
You should really consider cutting it out, Margaret. At your age, you need to be especially careful about what you put in your body. Sugar accelerates aging at a cellular level. It's practically poison for mature skin. The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. Marcus reached for a cookie, but his movements were slower now, less enthusiastic. "Mom's cookies are fine for a special occasion," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "If you say so, darling." Victoria's voice dripped with indulgence, as if she were humoring a child who insisted on believing in Santa Claus. "I just worry about your health. We've talked about cleaning up your diet." I poured tea into 3 cups, my hands steady, despite the anger beginning to simmer beneath my carefully maintained composure. "Cream or sugar?" I asked, then winced at my own words. Of course Victoria wouldn't want sugar. "Just black for me," Victoria said. "I'm very particular about what I consume. My body is my instrument, and I need to keep it in optimal condition for my work." "Victoria's a research scientist," Marcus interjected, pride evident in his voice. "She's doing groundbreaking work in cellular regeneration at Seattle Medical Research Institute." "How impressive," I said, meaning it. I'd raise Marcus to respect education and achievement. "What kind of research exactly?" Victoria's entire demeanor shifted. She sat up straighter, her phone forgotten, her attention suddenly focused like a laser. This, I realized, was a subject she loved to discuss. "I'm currently leading a team investigating the mechanisms of cellular aging and potential interventions to slow or reverse the process. We're particularly focused on telomere preservation and the role of specific proteins in maintaining cellular integrity." She spoke for the next 15 minutes without pause, using terminology that flew over my head. Something about DNA methylation, epigenetic markers, and clinical trial protocols. I tried to follow along, nodding in what I hoped were the right places, but I felt like someone who had wandered into a lecture hall for a class they hadn't signed up for. Marcus watched her with undisguised admiration, hanging on every word. He looked at her the way he used to look at his father, with a mixture of love and awe that made my heart ache with a feeling I couldn't quite name. "That sounds incredibly complex," I said when she finally paused for breath. "You must be very intelligent to work on such important research." "Intelligence is necessary, but not sufficient," Victoria replied, sipping her tea with her pinky extended, in a gesture that seemed calculated to demonstrate refinement. "What separates exceptional scientists from merely competent ones is drive, ambition, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for your work. Too many people in research are content to be mediocre, to coast on adequate performance rather than pursuing genuine excellence." She glanced at Marcus, and something passed between them, a look I couldn't quite interpret, that made my son's jaw tighten slightly.
"Victoria just published a paper in the Journal of Cellular Biology," Marcus said, his voice carrying a forced brightness. "It's already generated significant attention in the field." "Co-authored," Victoria corrected, "though I did the majority of the actual work. That's often how it goes in academia. The people who do the real labor don't always get the primary credit they deserve." "That hardly seems fair," I ventured. Victoria shrugged, a gesture that managed to convey both acceptance and superiority. "Fair isn't really the point. What matters is producing work that advances the field. Whether your name is first or last on the paper is less important than the impact of the research itself." She paused. "Though, of course, first authorship does matter for career advancement, grant applications, and establishing yourself as a leader rather than a follower." The conversation continued in this vein for another 40 minutes, with Victoria dominating the discussion, Marcus contributing occasional comments that seemed designed to impress her, and me sitting increasingly quiet on the edge of my own sofa, feeling more like an observer in someone else's performance than a participant in a conversation. Victoria talked about her work, her publications, her connections with prominent researchers at Johns Hopkins and Stanford. She mentioned conferences she attended in Geneva and Tokyo, dropped names of famous scientists I'd never heard of, and painted a picture of a world so far removed from my small house in Bridgeport that it might as well have been another planet. Through it all, she barely looked at me. When she did, her eyes would sweep over me with that same dismissive glance, as if confirming that I was exactly as unremarkable as she'd initially assessed. Marcus, for his part, seemed caught between two worlds, trying to engage his mother while clearly desperate to impress his girlfriend. He'd bring up topics from my life, memories from his childhood, but Victoria would steer the conversation back to her own interests with the skill of someone used to being the center of attention. "Marcus tells me you used to work as a school secretary," Victoria said at one point, making it sound like a job that barely qualified as employment. "That must have been steady work." "I worked at Bridgeport Elementary for 23 years, I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. It allowed me to be home when Marcus got out of school, and the benefits were good enough to keep us afloat after his father died. "How practical," Victoria said, in a tone that suggested practicality was something only people without better options worried about. My circumstances. As if being a widow, raising a child alone was a lifestyle choice rather than a necessity born from tragedy. As they prepared to leave, Victoria stood and smoothed her coat with practiced precision, checking her reflection in the mirror by the door. She looked flawless, of course. Every hair and place, makeup perfect, not a wrinkle in her expensive clothes. "It was lovely meeting you, Margaret," she said, extending her hand again in that same brief, cold gesture. "I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. After all, Marcus and I are getting quite serious." She glanced at my son with a possessive smile. "Very serious indeed." After they left, I stood in my doorway watching the silver Mercedes pull away from my curb, leaving me alone with the tea growing cold on the coffee table and the untouched cookies that suddenly seemed to represent everything inadequate about my life. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that Victoria was just nervous about meeting her boyfriend's mother, that her comments weren't meant to be cruel, just thoughtless, that I should give her the benefit of the doubt. I was wrong on every count. Over the next 3 months, Victoria became a regular presence in my life, or rather, a regular reminder that I didn't measure up to her standards of what a person should be. Marcus called every Sunday, as he always had, but now Victoria was often there in the background. I could hear her voice, making comments, offering opinions, shaping the conversation even when she wasn't directly participating. Our talks grew shorter, more superficial. Marcus asked about my health, my garden, my book club, but in the distracted way of someone checking items off a list, rather than genuinely interested in the answers. Then came the invitations to join them for various events, and each one felt less like an inclusion and more like an endurance test. The first was Marcus's birthday dinner in October. He turned 43 that year, and Victoria insisted on taking us to Elevation, a restaurant on the top floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise where dinner for 3 would cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I took a taxi because I didn't trust my 2008 Honda Civic to navigate downtown traffic, and the cost of parking would have been astronomical anyway. I wore my best dress, a navy blue number I'd bought for a friend's daughter's wedding 3 years ago, and my nicest shoes, though they pinched my toes after 15 minutes. The restaurant was everything I'd expected and feared. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline, tables spaced far enough apart for private conversation, and waitstaff that moved with choreographed precision, and a dress code that made me feel immediately underdressed despite my best efforts. Victoria arrived 10 minutes after I did, making an entrance that turned heads throughout the restaurant.
She wore a black dress that clung to her figure in ways that defied gravity. Her hair swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. She looked like she belonged in this rarefied air, while I felt like an imposter who'd wandered in from a budget department store.
Victoria just published a paper in the Journal of Cellular Biology, Marcus said, his voice carrying a forced brightness. It's already generated significant attention in the field. Co-authored, Victoria corrected, though I did the majority of the actual work. That's often how it goes in academia. The people who do the real labor don't always get the primary credit they deserve. That hardly seems fair, I ventured. Victoria shrugged, a gesture that managed to convey both acceptance and superiority. Fair isn't really the point. What matters is producing work that advances the field. Whether your name is first or last on the paper is less important than the impact of the research itself. She paused. Though, of course, first authorship does matter for career advancement, grant applications, and establishing yourself as a leader rather than a follower. The conversation continued in this vein for another 40 minutes, with Victoria dominating the discussion, Marcus contributing occasional comments that seemed designed to impress her, and me sitting increasingly quiet on the edge of my own sofa, feeling more like an observer in someone else's performance than a participant in a conversation. Victoria talked about her work, her publications, her connections with prominent researchers at Johns Hopkins and Stanford. She mentioned conferences she attended in Geneva and Tokyo, dropped names of famous scientists I'd never heard of, and painted a picture of a world so far removed from my small house in Bridgeport that it might as well have been another planet. Through it all, she barely looked at me. When she did, her eyes would sweep over me with that same dismissive glance, as if confirming that I was exactly as unremarkable as she'd initially assessed. Marcus, for his part, seemed caught between two worlds, trying to engage his mother while clearly desperate to impress his girlfriend. He'd bring up topics from my life, memories from his childhood, but Victoria would steer the conversation back to her own interests with the skill of someone used to being the center of attention. Marcus tells me you used to work as a school secretary, Victoria said at one point, making it sound like a job that barely qualified as employment. That must have been steady work. I worked at Bridgeport Elementary for 23 years, I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. It allowed me to be home when Marcus got out of school, and the benefits were good enough to keep us afloat after his father died. How practical, Victoria said, in a tone that suggested practicality was something only people without better options worried about. My circumstances. As if being a widow, raising a child alone was a lifestyle choice rather than a necessity born from tragedy. As they prepared to leave, Victoria stood and smoothed her coat with practiced precision, checking her reflection in the mirror by the door. She looked flawless, of course. Every hair in place, makeup perfect, not a wrinkle in her expensive clothes. "It was lovely meeting you, Margaret," she said, extending her hand again in that same brief, cold gesture. "I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. After all, Marcus and I are getting quite serious." She glanced at my son with a possessive smile. "Very serious indeed." After they left, I stood in my doorway watching the silver Mercedes pull away from my curb, leaving me alone with the tea growing cold on the coffee table and the untouched cookies that suddenly seemed to represent everything inadequate about my life. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that Victoria was just nervous about meeting her boyfriend's mother, that her comments weren't meant to be cruel, just thoughtless, that I should give her the benefit of the doubt. I was wrong on every count. Over the next 3 months, Victoria became a regular presence in my life, or rather, a regular reminder that I didn't measure up to her standards of what a person should be. Marcus called every Sunday, as he always had, but now Victoria was often there in the background. I could hear her voice, making comments, offering opinions, shaping the conversation even when she wasn't directly participating. Our talks grew shorter, more superficial. Marcus asked about my health, my garden, my book club, but in the distracted way of someone checking items off a list, rather than genuinely interested in the answers. Then came the invitations to join them for various events, and each one felt less like an inclusion and more like an endurance test. The first was Marcus's birthday dinner in October. He turned 43 that year, and Victoria insisted on taking us to Elevation, a restaurant on the top floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise where dinner for three would cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I took a taxi because I didn't trust my 2008 Honda Civic to navigate downtown traffic, and the cost of parking would have been astronomical anyway. I wore my best dress, a navy blue number I'd bought for a friend's daughter's wedding 3 years ago, and my nicest shoes, though they pinched my toes after 15 minutes. The restaurant was everything I'd expected and feared. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline, tables spaced far enough apart for private conversation, and waitstaff that moved with choreographed precision, and a dress code that made me feel immediately underdressed despite my best efforts. Victoria arrived 10 minutes after I did, making an entrance that turned heads throughout the restaurant. She wore a black dress that clung to her figure in ways that defied gravity. Her hair swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. She looked like she belonged in this rarefied air, while I felt like an imposter who'd wandered in from a budget department store.
Margaret! She air-kissed both my cheeks, leaving a trace of expensive perfume that made me acutely aware of the drugstore body spray I'd used. How wonderful that you could join us! Marcus insisted we include you in his special day. The emphasis on insisted landed like a stone in my stomach. This wasn't her idea. I was here because my son had asked, possibly argued for my presence. Marcus arrived moments later, looking handsome in a tailored suit that I knew Victoria must have helped him choose. He hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt like I had my son back, the boy who used to tell me everything, who valued my opinion, who made me feel needed and loved. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot." But as soon as we sat down, Victoria took control of the evening with the confidence of a general commanding troops. "I've already ordered the wine," she announced, not asking if anyone had preferences. "It's a 2015 Chateau Neuf du Pape that pairs beautifully with the menu I've selected." "You ordered for all of us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Of course, this restaurant is quite complex, and I didn't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by the options. Besides, I know what works here. She smiled at me with that same patronizing smile that made my teeth clench. The menu can be quite intimidating if you're not familiar with fine dining. When the sommelier arrived with the wine, Victoria went through an elaborate tasting ritual, swirling, sniffing, sipping, considering with her eyes closed like she was communing with the spirit of the grapes themselves. "Excellent," she pronounced finally. "You can pour." As the sommelier filled our glasses, Victoria turned to me with that same patronizing smile. "You probably won't fully appreciate the complexity, Margaret. This is a 2015 Burgundy from a small family vineyard. The flavor profile is quite subtle, earthy notes with hints of cherry and tobacco. You need a refined palate and significant experience with quality wines to really understand its nuances." I took a sip. It tasted like wine. Expensive wine, perhaps, but to my unsophisticated palate, not dramatically different from the $15 bottle I'd bought for a dinner party last year. "It's very nice," I said. Victoria's expression suggested this was exactly the pedestrian response she'd expected from someone like me. The meal arrived in courses, each one a tiny portion of food arranged on the plate like abstract art. Victoria explained each dish in exhaustive detail, where the ingredients came from, how they were prepared, which Michelin-starred chef had influenced the preparation technique. She seemed to expect Marcus and I to be awed by her knowledge, and Marcus obliged, asking questions and making appreciative noises. I just ate quietly, trying not to think about how 3 bites of scallops cost $45. The conversation inevitably turned to Victoria's work, as it always did. She'd just been named co-author on another major research paper, this one being published in the New England Journal of Medicine. "It's generating significant buzz in the research community," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is the kind of work that establishes you as a serious player in your field, the kind of thing that leads to keynote speeches at major conferences, grant opportunities, potential for a full professorship." "That's wonderful, Victoria," I said, genuinely impressed, despite my growing dislike of her. "You must have worked incredibly hard." "Hard work is the baseline," she replied, as if I'd insulted her by suggesting effort was involved. "What separates good researchers from truly exceptional ones isn't just work ethic, it's vision, strategic thinking, and the willingness to make sacrifices that others won't make." She glanced at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Success requires cutting away distractions, eliminating anything that doesn't serve your ultimate goals. You have to be ruthless about protecting your time and energy." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pushing food around his plate without eating. "Some people are contributors," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "They add value, create opportunities, elevate everyone around them. And some people are, well, they're different. They consume resources without producing equivalent value. They're content to simply exist rather than achieve." The insult was subtle enough that I couldn't call her out without seeming paranoid, but clear enough that I felt it like a knife between my ribs. The evening dragged on for 3 hours. 3 hours of feeling inadequate, out of place, and increasingly angry at myself for accepting this invitation. When the check arrived, Victoria made a show of insisting on paying for everything, pulling out a black American Express card with the casual confidence of someone for whom money was never an obstacle. "My treat," she said magnanimously. "After all, it's not every day your boyfriend turns 43. And Margaret, please don't worry about contributing. I know things must be tight on a fixed income." The casual cruelty of it, acknowledging my financial limitations while pretending to be generous, made me want to cry or scream or walk out, but I did none of those things. I smiled and thanked her and pretended not to notice the pitying look she gave me as she signed the receipt. When Marcus walked me to my taxi afterwards, he hugged me tightly. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot." But I say, with troubled eyes, "She seems very accomplished." "She is." He pulled back, looking at me with troubled eyes. "But she pushes too hard sometimes. She has these ideas about how life should be, what success looks like, and she can't understand why everyone doesn't see things her way." "Marcus, are you happy?"
The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm with a brilliant, beautiful woman who's going places. Of course I'm happy." It wasn't really an answer, but my taxi arrived before I could press further. Over the next 2 months, the pattern continued. Victoria would orchestrate events that brought us together, each one designed, whether consciously or not, to highlight the gap between her world and mine. A wine tasting, where she explained every varietal while I nodded along, pretending to detect notes of blackberry and oak. A gallery opening, where she held court among artists and collectors, while I stood in a corner trying to understand why a canvas painted entirely blue was worth $50,000. A charity gala, where I was the oldest person in attendance by at least a decade, wearing a dress I'd borrowed from my neighbor, while Victoria glittered in couture. Each event chipped away a little more of my dignity, my confidence, my sense of belonging in my own son's life. But the real breaking point came in mid-January, at a faculty mixer hosted by Seattle Medical Research Institute. Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on alert. "Mom, the Institute is hosting a winter reception this Saturday evening. It's kind of a networking event for staff and researchers. Victoria thought it would be nice if you came." My stomach clenched. "Victoria thought it would be nice?" "Yeah, she mentioned that you might enjoy seeing where we work, meeting some of our colleagues. It's casual, just wine and appetizers on the Institute lawn." Nothing involving Victoria was ever casual, but I heard myself agreeing anyway. Maybe because I was desperate to feel included in Marcus's life. Maybe because some part of me still hoped that I was wrong about Victoria, that her coldness was just awkwardness, that underneath the superiority was a decent person who could come to accept me. I was spectacularly wrong. Saturday arrived cold and clear, one of those Seattle January days where the sky is blue bright but the wind cuts through your coat. I spent 3 hours getting ready, trying on everything in my limited wardrobe before settling on black slacks, a burgundy blouse, and a cardigan that at least looked presentable, even if it wasn't designer. I borrowed a necklace from my neighbor Joyce, who assured me I looked lovely and told me to stop worrying. The Seattle Medical Research Institute campus was in the University District, a sprawling complex of modern buildings surrounded by carefully landscaped grounds. The winter reception was being held under large white tents on the south lawn, with outdoor heaters positioned strategically to combat the chill. I arrived at 6:30, as Marcus had instructed, and immediately felt out of place. Everyone was dressed in that effortless, expensive, casual style that only people with money can achieve, the kind of clothes that look simple but cost a fortune. Cashmere, silk, designer jeans that fit perfectly, leather jackets that were worn just right. I clutched my borrowed purse and tried to look like I belonged. Marcus found me within minutes, appearing at my elbow with a glass of wine and a smile that looked strained around the edges. "Mom, you made it! Here, I got you some wine." "Thank you, sweetheart." I took the glass gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. "This is quite an impressive facility." "Yeah, the Institute does good work. Come on, let me introduce you to some people." But before he could lead me anywhere, Victoria appeared, gliding through the crowd like she owned it. She wore perfectly tailored charcoal pants, a silk cream blouse, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her hair was down tonight, falling in perfect waves around her shoulders, and she carried a glass of wine like it was a prop in a photo shoot. "Margaret!" She air-kissed my cheeks again, and I was starting to hate that pretentious gesture. "I'm so glad you could make it. Marcus was worried you might not feel comfortable at this type of event." The implication was clear. This was not my kind of place, not my kind of people. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Of course. I always think it's important to include family, even when—" She trailed off meaningfully, letting the unfinished sentence hang in the air like smoke. Marcus had already been pulled away by a colleague, leaving me alone with Victoria. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through mine in a gesture that might have looked friendly to an outside observer, but felt like a prison guard leading an inmate. She navigated us through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to greet various researchers and administrators. Each introduction followed the same pattern. "This is Margaret Chen, Marcus's mother. She lives in a darling little house in Bridgeport, very settled there." The word settled always carried that same subtle derision, as if I'd given up on life rather than simply found a place to live it. I stood beside Victoria like a silent accessory while she dominated conversations with her usual combination of charm, intelligence, and barely concealed competitiveness. She knew everyone, remembered everyone's research projects, asked insightful questions that demonstrated her expertise. She was, I had to admit, impressive in this element. And I was invisible. Eventually, I excused myself to find a restroom, needing a break from Victoria's suffocating presence. When I returned 15 minutes later, I found her holding court with a small group of well-dressed academics near one of the outdoor heaters. I recognized Dr. Philip Chen, head of the cellular biology department, Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, who I'd met briefly at Marcus's birthday dinner, and Dr. James Whitmore, whose research on neurodegenerative diseases I'd read about in the local paper. They were all laughing at something Victoria had said, their attention focused on her like she was the sun, and they were planets in orbit. Marcus stood slightly outside the circle, I noticed, not quite part of the inner group, but trying to seem engaged. I approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt, but Victoria spotted me immediately. "Margaret!" Her voice rang out across the space between us. "Come join us. We were just talking about the upcoming symposium in Boston." I stepped into the circle, suddenly very conscious of my borrowed necklace and department store clothes. Victoria turned back to the group. As I was saying, the symposium is one of the most important events in our field this year. Anyone who's serious about advancing their career will be there. Are you presenting? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Of course. I have 2 papers accepted, one on telomere preservation and another on epigenetic interventions in aging. Victoria's smile was cat-like, satisfied. It's a significant opportunity for visibility. I'm hoping to attend as well, Marcus interjected. There are several presentations I'd like to see, and it would be good networking. Victoria turned to him, and something cold flashed in her eyes before her smile returned. Oh, darling, I don't think that's a good idea. The symposium is quite expensive. Registration alone is over $1,000, plus flights, hotel, meals. We need to be practical about which conferences offer genuine value. But Victoria, this is one of the biggest conferences in our field. You just said yourself how important it is. For me, yes, I'm presenting. My attendance has clear professional value. She paused, choosing her words with precision. But for you, well, you need to think strategically about where you invest your time and resources. The other academics shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their wine glasses or the ground. Marcus's face flushed. I have my own research projects. Which are very nice, Victoria interrupted, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd come to hate. But let's be realistic about priorities. My work is generating international attention. I need to focus all my energy on capitalizing on that momentum. And you, she touched his arm with practiced affection, you need to focus on supporting that success rather than pursuing your own separate agenda. I couldn't stay silent. Marcus has always been brilliant. He was top of his class in graduate school. Victoria turned to me, and the mask slipped for just a moment. I saw pure contempt in her eyes before she smiled. Of course he was, Margaret. He's very competent. But competent isn't exceptional. In academic research, exceptional is what gets you noticed, what gets you funded, what gets you a career that actually matters. She turned back to the group, effectively dismissing me. The problem is that Marcus carries too much extra weight. Between his family obligations and his misplaced loyalty to research projects that aren't going anywhere, he's holding himself back from his real potential. The words hung in the air like poison. Extra weight. She wasn't just talking about his research. She was talking about me. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, I think I see someone I need to speak with. No, wait. Victoria's voice stopped him. I think this is important. Marcus needs to understand that success requires sacrifice. You can't achieve excellence while also trying to maintain every relationship and obligation from your past. At some point, you have to cut loose the dead weight and focus on what actually moves your life forward. She looked directly at me now, her eyes cold and sharp. You understand what I'm saying, don't you, Margaret? Some people add value to your life, and some people just take up space. Some relationships lift you up, and others drag you down. The successful people in this world figure out which is which and act accordingly. The group was completely silent now, everyone staring at their drinks or the ground or anywhere but at me. You're just extra weight holding Marcus back from his real future. Victoria said it directly to my face this time, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, like she was stating an obvious truth that everyone else was too polite to acknowledge. If he's going to reach his potential, he needs to prioritize his own advancement over outdated obligations and relationships that don't serve his goals anymore. She paused, letting the words sink in. I'm sure you want what's best for your son. Real love means letting go when you're in the way. I felt the world tilt sideways. My vision blurred at the edges, and I couldn't tell if I was going to cry or scream or simply collapse right there on the perfectly manicured lawn. Excuse me,
I managed to whisper. I walked away before anyone could respond, before I could see the pity or agreement or embarrassment on their faces. I walked past the food tables and the bar and the clusters of important people having important conversations. I walked until I found myself at the edge of the lawn, near the parking lot, standing alone in the cold January night.
Behind me, the party continued. Laughter and conversation drifted through the air. The sounds of people living lives that didn't include me, that had no room for someone like me. Old, ordinary, extra weight. I called a taxi and left without saying goodbye to anyone. The ride home passed in a blur. When I finally walked through my front door, I stood in my living room, my quaint, nostalgic, inadequate living room, and let myself cry properly for the first time in years. But as I cried, something else began to stir inside me, something harder than grief, something colder than sadness. Victoria Ashford had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought I was weak because I was old. She thought I was irrelevant because I didn't have degrees or publications or designer clothes. She thought wrong. I was 72 years old, and I had survived things that would have broken Victoria Ashford like a twig. I had buried a husband and survived cancer twice. I had raised a child alone while working 2 jobs. I had fought for every single thing I had in this life, and nobody got to dismiss me as extra weight. Victoria had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she'd humiliated me into silence, into accepting my role as the unwanted burden in my son's life. She thought I'd fade quietly into the background, too ashamed to make trouble, too weak to fight back. She was about to learn that the most dangerous person in the world is someone who has already lost everything and has nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Victoria's words over and over like a broken record. Extra weight, holding Marcus back from his real future. The cruelty of it burned. But beneath the hurt, my mind was working, because something Victoria had said during that awful evening kept nagging at me, a detail that didn't quite fit. She'd mentioned that Marcus needed to focus on supporting her success rather than pursuing his own separate agenda, that he needed to prioritize her career advancement over his own research projects. But Marcus loved research. It was his passion, the reason he'd gone into this field in the first place. He used to call me every week with updates about his work, excited about new findings, frustrated by setbacks, always engaged and energized. When had those calls stopped? When had his own ambitions become subordinate to Victoria's? I got up around 3 a.m. and made myself tea, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, a refurbished model Marcus had given me 3 years ago so we could video chat. I opened my email and started scrolling back through months of correspondence with my son. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. 8 months ago, Marcus's emails were full of details about his own work, his own goals, his own excitement about where his career was heading. Then Victoria appeared, and slowly, incrementally, the focus shifted. His messages became shorter, more focused on her achievements, her publications, her career trajectory. By 3 months ago, he barely mentioned his own work at all. I opened a browser and typed Seattle Medical Research Institute Staff Directory. Marcus's profile came up easily. Research Coordinator, Cellular Biology Department. His bio mentioned his educational background, his previous positions, and his current responsibilities. But there was something strange. The list of his publications, which had been steadily growing before Victoria entered his life, seemed to have stopped completely about 7 months ago. I clicked over to Victoria's profile, Research Scientist, Lead Investigator. Her publication list was extensive and impressive, with several papers published in the past year alone. I started clicking through them, reading the abstracts, even though much of the technical language was beyond my understanding. Then I noticed something. One of Victoria's most recent papers, the one published in the Journal of Cellular Biology that she'd been so proud of at Marcus's birthday dinner, listed her as first author. But when I clicked through to see the full author list, I found Marcus's name there too, buried in the middle as third author out of 7.
I frowned and clicked on another paper. Same pattern. Victoria as first author, Marcus somewhere in the middle of a longer list. I clicked on a third paper. This one published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the big one Victoria had been so excited about at Marcus's birthday dinner. Again, Victoria was listed as first author, and again, Marcus's name appeared in the author list, this time as 4th out of 8. My pulse quickened. I wasn't a scientist, but I knew enough about academic publishing to understand that author order mattered. The first author was typically the person who did the primary work. Subsequent authors had contributed, but in lesser capacities. But something about this pattern felt wrong. I spent the next 2 hours digging through academic databases, reading papers, comparing publication records. Victoria had published 7 major papers in the past 18 months. Marcus appeared as a middle author on all 7 of them. Before Victoria, Marcus had been first author on 3 papers and second author on 4 others over the previous 2 years. His publication record was solid, respectable, indicative of an independent researcher building his own career. Then Victoria appeared, and suddenly Marcus wasn't publishing anything under his own name anymore. He was just a name in the middle of someone else's papers. I sat back from my laptop, my tea cold and forgotten, watching dawn light creep through my kitchen window. Something was wrong here. Something beyond Victoria's cruelty and my son's infatuation. Marcus wouldn't just abandon his own research to become a supporting player in someone else's work. Not without a reason. Not unless...
What if he hadn't abandoned it? What if he was still doing the work, but someone else was taking credit? The thought was so ugly I almost pushed it away. But it nagged at me, growing stronger as I considered everything I'd observed over the past few months. Victoria's constant emphasis on her own achievements, her dismissal of Marcus's work as less important than her own, her insistence that he focus on supporting her success rather than pursuing his own projects. The way she controlled conversations, controlled situations, controlled Marcus himself with a combination of charisma and calculated cruelty. And that comment she'd made about some people being contributors and others being different. People who consumed resources without producing equivalent value. What if Victoria saw Marcus as a resource to be exploited rather than a partner to be respected? I needed more information, but I couldn't exactly call the institute and start asking questions without tipping my hand. I needed to be subtle, careful, strategic. I needed to think like Victoria, coldly, calculatedly, focused on the end goal without letting emotion cloud my judgment. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who dismissed me as extra weight was about to teach me how to fight back. On Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I got dressed in my most professional-looking clothes, a gray pantsuit I'd bought for a friend's funeral 2 years ago, and drove to the Seattle Public Library downtown. If I was going to investigate Victoria Ashford, I needed to understand her world, her work, her vulnerabilities, and I needed to do it without leaving any digital trail that could be traced back to me. The library's research section was quiet at 10 a.m. on a Monday, occupied mostly by students and a few other retirees like me. I claimed a computer terminal in a corner and got to work. First, I pulled up Victoria's complete publication history, 7 papers in the past 18 months, as I'd already discovered. But I dug deeper this time, reading not just the abstracts, but the acknowledgement sections, the funding information, the institutional affiliations. Something interesting emerged. All 7 papers acknowledged the same funding source, the Whitmore-Castellan Foundation. I'd never heard of it, so I opened a new tab and searched. The Whitmore-Castellan Foundation was a private research foundation that provided grants to promising medical researchers. Their website was professional and vague, with mission statements about advancing human health and supporting innovative science.
The foundation had been established 15 years ago with an initial endowment of $50 million from the estate of Dr. Harold Whitmore, a pharmaceutical researcher who'd made his fortune developing anticoagulant medications. What caught my attention was the foundation's grant structure. Unlike most research funding, which required extensive applications, peer review, and competitive selection processes, Whitmore-Castellan grants were awarded at the discretion of the Foundation's Board of Directors. And the current board chair was Dr. James Whitmore, the same Dr. Whitmore who'd been part of that uncomfortable conversation at the faculty mixer. I sat back, thinking. Victoria had funding from a private foundation chaired by someone she clearly knew well. That wasn't necessarily suspicious, but it was interesting, especially combined with her remarkably productive publication record and Marcus's sudden transformation from independent researcher to supporting player. I spent the next 3 hours digging into academic databases, reading papers, and trying to understand the actual research being published under Victoria's name. The work was sophisticated and impressive, focused on cellular aging mechanisms and potential interventions to slow or reverse age-related decline. Each paper built on the previous one, suggesting a coherent research program rather than scattered projects. But here's what struck me as odd. The methodology sections of these papers described laboratory work, data collection, and analysis that would require an enormous amount of hands-on time. Running experiments, collecting samples, analyzing results, preparing figures and tables. This was hundreds of hours of work per paper. Victoria held a full-time position at the Institute, attended conferences, networked extensively, and somehow still managed to produce this volume of work as first author? It seemed unlikely, unless she wasn't actually doing all the work herself. I clicked over to Marcus's Institute profile again and looked more carefully at his job description. Research Coordinator, Cellular Biology Department. Responsibilities include designing and implementing research protocols, supervising laboratory procedures, collecting and analyzing data, preparing reports and presentations. In other words, Marcus's job was to do exactly the kind of hands-on research work that these papers required. My stomach tightened. The picture forming in my mind was ugly, but it fit all the pieces together too well to ignore. What if Victoria was using Marcus to do her research, the actual labor of conducting experiments, collecting data, analyzing results, and then claiming first authorship on the resulting publications? In academia, first authorship meant you did the primary work and deserved primary credit. Middle authorship meant you contributed, but in a supporting role. If Marcus was doing the core research, but being listed as a middle author, while Victoria took first authorship and all the associated credit, that would be... I wasn't sure what to call it. Exploitation? Fraud? Academic theft? But I needed proof before I could accuse anyone of anything. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Seattle Medical Research Institute Employment Directory. After some clicking around, I found a staff contact list that included email addresses and phone extensions.
I pulled out my phone and dialed the general number for the cellular biology department, my heart pounding. Cellular biology, this is Amanda. Hello, my name is Margaret Chen. I'm Marcus Chen's mother, and I'm trying to reach him about a family matter. Is he in the lab today? Let me check. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Looks like Marcus is in lab 4B today. That extension is 4421, but he might not answer if he's in the middle of something. Do you want me to take a message? That's all right. I'll try him later. Thank you so much. I paused, trying to sound casual. He's always working such long hours. I worry about him. Amanda laughed. Tell me about it. He's here more than anyone except maybe Dr. Ashford. Those two practically live in the lab. My pulse quickened. They work together quite a bit? Oh, yeah, constantly. Marcus runs most of the actual experiments for Dr. Ashford's projects. She's in meetings and conferences a lot, so he handles the day-to-day lab work. He's really good at it, too. Super meticulous with data collection. That's my Marcus, I said warmly, my mind racing. Always been detail-oriented. Well, I won't keep you. Thank you for your help. I hung up and sat staring at my phone. Marcus runs most of the actual experiments for Dr. Ashford's projects. There it was. Confirmation from someone who had no reason to lie, no idea what they just revealed. Victoria wasn't just taking credit for work Marcus contributed to. She was taking credit for work Marcus was actually doing while she was off networking and building her reputation on his labor. I spent the rest of that day at the library, printing out papers, saving PDFs to a flash drive, documenting everything I could find about Victoria's publications and Marcus's declining independent research profile. By the time I left at 5 p.m., I had a folder full of evidence that suggested academic misconduct. But I still needed more. I needed to understand exactly how this scheme worked, who else might be involved, and most importantly, I needed proof that would be undeniable. Because if I was going to take on Victoria Ashford, brilliant, connected, ruthless Victoria Ashford, I needed to make sure I could cut her down completely. She'd called me extra weight. She'd tried to cut me out of my son's life. Now I was going to cut her out of every paper that carried her name. And when I was done, she'd have nothing left. The week after my visit to the library, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd learned. Victoria wasn't just cruel, she was a thief. She was stealing Marcus's work, his research, his future, and wrapping it all up in a bow with her name on it. But I needed more than suspicions and a helpful administrative assistant's casual comments. I needed concrete proof that would stand up to scrutiny, that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I spent Tuesday morning pacing my small living room, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't just confront Marcus. He was clearly under Victoria's spell, and he'd probably defend her. I couldn't go to the Institute administration without solid evidence, and I certainly couldn't let Victoria know I was investigating her. That's when I remembered something Marcus had mentioned months ago, back before Victoria had completely taken over his life. He'd been excited about a new cloud storage system the Institute had implemented for research data, something about secure backup and collaboration features. If Marcus was doing the actual research work, there would be digital records, lab notes, data files, analysis spreadsheets, draft manuscripts. And if the Institute used cloud storage, those files might be accessible from anywhere. The question was, did I have any way to access them? I sat down at my laptop and opened my email, scrolling back through years of correspondence with Marcus. There, 18 months ago, he'd sent me login credentials for a family photo-sharing account he'd set up so I could see pictures from his hiking trips and holiday celebrations. I clicked on the email and looked at the password he'd used. Margie C. 2010. My nickname plus the year my husband died. Marcus had always been sentimental about passwords, using dates and names that meant something to him. It drove his father crazy back when Marcus was a teenager. You can't use your dog's name as a password. But Marcus had never changed the habit. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, he'd used a similar password for his work accounts. I pulled up the Seattle Medical Research Institute website and found the employee portal login page. My hands trembled as I typed in Marcus's work email address, mchen@smri.edu. Then I paused at the password field. What would Marcus use? Something meaningful, something he could remember easily. I tried a few combinations. Margie C. 2010? Invalid. Marcus 1981, his birth year? Invalid. Cell Bio 2023? Invalid.
I sat back, frustrated. This was stupid. I couldn't just guess my way into his account, and even if I could, wasn't this illegal? Wasn't I crossing a line I couldn't uncross? But then I thought about Victoria's face as she'd called me extra weight in front of all of those people. I thought about my son's shrinking publication record and growing subservience. I thought about how Marcus used to call me every week, excited and energized, and how those calls had become increasingly rare and hollow. I was already across the line. Might as well go all the way. I tried one more combination. Marguerite C. 1952. My full name plus my birth year. Invalid. Then I remembered something. When Marcus was 12, we'd adopted a rescue dog together, a golden retriever mix we'd named Archimedes because Marcus was going through a phase where he was obsessed with ancient mathematicians. That dog had lived to be 15, dying just a few months before Marcus started at the Institute.
Archimedes 15? The page loaded. I was in. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The employee portal opened to a dashboard showing various links: email, calendar, research database, file storage, and something called CollabSpace with a note that it was the Institute's research collaboration platform. I clicked on CollabSpace. The interface was clean and intuitive, showing a list of projects Marcus had access to. Most were labeled with technical names I didn't understand. Telomere Preservation Study 2024, Epigenetic Markers in Cellular Senescence, Mitochondrial Function Analysis Series. But one folder caught my eye: VA Publications Primary Data. VA, Victoria Ashford. I clicked on it. The folder contained dozens of subfolders, each labeled with a paper title and date. I recognized several of them from Victoria's publication list. My hand shook as I clicked on the most recent one: Epigenetic Interventions in Age-Related Cellular Decline, NEJM 2024. Inside were hundreds of files: Excel spreadsheets with raw data, Word documents with lab protocols, image files showing microscopy results, and most damning of all, a document titled Draft Manuscript MC version 12.docx. MC. Margaret Chen. I opened it. What I found made my blood run cold. It was a complete manuscript: introduction, methods, results, discussion, references, figures, tables, everything needed for a scientific publication. And at the top, in the author line, it read, Margaret Chen, Ph.D., Victoria Ashford, Ph.D., and 5 other names. Marcus was listed first as the primary author, the person who'd done the main work. But I'd seen this paper published. I'd looked it up just days ago. And in the published version, Victoria was first author and Marcus was 4th. Someone had changed the author order between this draft and publication. I sat back from my laptop, my mind reeling. This wasn't just academic discourtesy or a difference of opinion about who deserved more credit. This was fraud. Victoria had taken Marcus's work, put her name first, and published it as if she'd been the primary researcher. I opened another folder. Same pattern. Draft manuscript with Marcus as first author, published version with Victoria in that position. I opened a 3rd, and a 4th, and a 5th. Every single paper followed the same trajectory. Marcus did the work, wrote the drafts, collected and analyzed the data. Victoria swooped in at the end, rearranged the author order, and claimed credit for his labor. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stop typing. I felt physically ill, partly from anger, partly from the sheer audacity of what Victoria was doing, but mostly from the realization of how completely she'd manipulated my son. Marcus knew. He had to know. These were his files, his drafts, his data. He could see the author order being changed. He was watching his work be stolen in real time. And he was letting it happen. Why? What kind of hold did Victoria have over him? I needed to force myself to calm down and think strategically. I needed to save this evidence before someone discovered I'd accessed the account. I plugged in a flash drive and started copying files. The draft manuscripts showing Marcus as first author, the published versions showing Victoria in that position, the raw data proving Marcus had done the work. It took over an hour to download everything. When I finally logged out, I had a flash drive containing proof of systematic research theft, spanning 7 major publications over 18 months. But I still didn't understand the why. Why was Marcus allowing this? Was he being coerced, threatened, or was Victoria's manipulation so complete that he actually believed he deserved less credit than her? I needed to understand their relationship better. I needed to know what was really going on between them. I know this sounds pathetic. A 72-year-old woman spying on her own son sounds pathetic, desperate, maybe a little crazy. But I was past caring how it looked. Victoria had declared war on me when she called me extra weight in front of Marcus's colleagues. She just didn't know I was fighting back yet. Wednesday morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to the Seattle Medical Research Institute and parked in the visitor lot where I could see the main entrance. I felt ridiculous sitting there in my old Honda Civic, wrapped in a cardigan with a thermos of coffee like some noir detective. But I needed to see them together, to understand their dynamic when they thought no one was watching. Marcus arrived at 8:15 a.m., parking his newer Subaru in the employee lot. He looked tired, I noticed, his shoulders hunched as he walked toward the building carrying his laptop bag and a coffee cup. Victoria arrived 30 minutes later in her silver Mercedes, looking immaculate as always, in a fitted blazer and perfectly pressed slacks. She didn't go directly into the building. Instead, she stood by her car for several minutes, talking on the phone with animated gestures that suggested she was upset about something. I watched her through my rearview mirror, trying to read her body language. She paced beside her car, her free hand punctuating whatever she was saying with sharp, aggressive movements. Then she stopped, listened for a moment, and smiled. The predatory smile of someone who just won an argument. She hung up and strode into the building like she owned it. I waited another hour, but nothing else interesting happened. Researchers came and went, delivery trucks arrived with packages. A grounds crew started trimming the hedges near the entrance. Normal workday activities at a research institute. I was about to give up and go home when I saw Marcus emerge from the building, walking quickly toward the parking lot. He had his phone pressed to his ear and looked agitated. Victoria appeared in the doorway behind him, calling his name. Marcus stopped, turned, and even from this distance I could see the tension in his posture.
They talked for several minutes. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the dynamic clearly. Victoria did most of the talking, her hands moving expressively, occasionally touching Marcus's arm or shoulder. Marcus stood rigid, nodding occasionally, but clearly uncomfortable. Then Victoria pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly while she continued talking over his shoulder. From my vantage point, I could see her face, and the expression on it chilled me. There was no warmth, no affection, just calculated determination, like she was physically holding him in place while she drove home whatever point she was making. When she finally released him, Marcus walked back into the building with his shoulders even more hunched than before. Victoria watched him go with a satisfied smile, then pulled out her phone and made another call. I sat there for another 2 hours, watching the building and thinking about what I'd seen. The relationship between Marcus and Victoria wasn't romantic, at least not on her end. It was transactional, manipulative, a carefully maintained control structure where she held all the power and he provided all the labor. But I still didn't understand how she'd gotten him into this position in the first place. Marcus wasn't stupid or weak. Something must have happened to give Victoria leverage over him. That evening, I did something else I'd never done before. I created a fake email account, not under my real name, just a generic Gmail address, and sent a message to someone I'd been thinking about since the faculty mixer, Dr. Sarah Rodriguez. She'd been part of that awful conversation when Victoria humiliated me.
But I'd seen her discomfort. She'd shifted awkwardly, looked away, clearly disturbed by Victoria's cruelty. And, more importantly, she worked in the same department as Marcus and Victoria. She might know things, see things, understand things that could help me. The email was carefully worded. Dr. Rodriguez, you don't know me, but I need to speak with you about Dr. Victoria Ashford's research publications. I have information about potential irregularities in author attribution and research credit that I believe you should be aware of. This concerns issues of academic integrity that could affect the entire department. I understand this is an unusual request, but I assure you this is not a prank or harassment. I have documented evidence that I can share with you in person, at a location of your choosing. If you're willing to meet, please respond to this email. A concerned colleague. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then, I waited. Thursday passed with no response. I spent the day organizing all the evidence I'd collected, printed copies of the draft manuscripts, the published versions, a detailed timeline showing how the author order changed, notes about funding sources and publication venues. Friday morning, I was making breakfast when my phone chimed with an email notification. I'll meet you. Saturday, 2 p.m., Greenleaf Coffee House on Pike Street. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you mentioned. I will be wearing a blue scarf. S.R. My heart leapt. She was willing to listen. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. I spent Friday evening preparing my presentation of evidence, organizing it in a folder so I could walk Dr. Rodriguez through everything clearly and systematically. I practiced what I'd say, how I'd explain who I was, and why I was doing this. By Friday night, I was too nervous to sleep. This was my chance to bring someone from inside the institute onto my side, someone who understood the academic world and could help me understand what to do with the evidence I'd gathered. Or she could dismiss me as a crazy old woman making up stories about her son's girlfriend. She could go straight to Victoria and tell her someone was investigating her. She could ruin everything before I even got started. But I had to take the risk. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully. Professional, but not trying too hard. Credible, but not intimidating. I wanted to look like someone worth listening to, not someone to dismiss. I arrived at Greenleaf Coffee House 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table where we'd have some privacy. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink and watched the door, my folder of evidence in my lap, my palms sweating despite the cool air conditioning. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez walked in at exactly 2 p.m. She was in her late 40s, I guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She wore jeans and a sweater with the promised blue scarf, looking more relaxed than she had at the faculty mixer, but still carrying herself with the confidence of someone used to being taken seriously. She scanned the coffee shop, spotted me in the corner, and walked over with purpose. "You're the person who emailed me," she said without preamble. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Thank you for coming. Please sit down." She sat, but her posture remained guarded. "Before we start, I need to know who you are and why you're investigating Victoria." "My name is Margaret Chen. I'm Marcus Chen's mother." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "From the faculty mixer?" "Yes. Where Victoria," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "where things got uncomfortable. Where Victoria called me extra weight and suggested Marcus should cut me out of his life," I said bluntly. "Let's not dance around it." Dr. Rodriguez had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry about that. It was completely inappropriate." "Yes, it was. But that's not why I asked you here." I pulled out my folder and placed it on the table between us. "I'm here because Victoria Ashford is committing academic fraud, and I have proof." Her expression shifted from sympathy to sharp attention. "That's a serious accusation." "I know, and I wouldn't make it if I couldn't back it up." I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents.
The draft manuscript with Marcus as first author next to the published version with Victoria first. Look at these. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the documents carefully. I watched her eyes move across the pages, saw the moment when she registered the discrepancy in author order. "Where did you get these?" she asked quietly. "That's not important right now. What's important is what they show. Marcus wrote these papers. He did the research, collected the data, performed the analysis, wrote the manuscripts. And Victoria changed the author order before publication to put herself first and push Marcus down to a middle author position." I pulled out more examples. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern spanning 7 major publications over 18 months. Every single time, Marcus does the work, and Victoria takes primary credit. Dr. Rodriguez went through each example methodically, her expression growing darker with each page. When she finally looked up, her face was grim. "This is worse than I thought. You suspected something?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There have been questions in the department about Victoria's productivity, about how she's publishing so frequently while maintaining such a busy travel and networking schedule. Some people wondered if she had research assistants doing more of the work than was being credited. But we had no proof, and Victoria is very good at deflecting questions." "She's stealing my son's career," I said, hearing the emotion crack through my voice despite my attempt to stay calm. "She's using him to build her own reputation while systematically destroying his professional future. And I think she's manipulating him so thoroughly that either he doesn't realize it or feels powerless to stop it." Dr. Rodriguez sat back, taking off her glasses and rubbing her eyes. "Do you know why Marcus is allowing this? There must be something, some leverage she has over him." "I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out. But I know academic misconduct when I see it, even if I'm just a former school secretary without fancy degrees." I met her eyes directly. "I need your help. I need someone who understands this world, who knows how to report this kind of thing, who can help me make sure Victoria faces consequences." "You want to report her to the Institute?" "I want to destroy her career the way she's destroying my son's career. I want her cut from every paper that carries her name." I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the published papers highlighted with yellow marker. "She called me extra weight, said I was holding Marcus back from his real future. Well, she's about to learn what it feels like to have everything you've built cut away from under you." Dr. Rodriguez studied me for a long moment. "You know this will affect Marcus, too. If Victoria's papers are retracted or her authorship is challenged, his name is on those papers. It could damage his reputation by association." "His reputation is already being damaged. Right now, he looks like a mediocre researcher who can only contribute as a middle author on other people's projects. If the truth comes out that he's actually been doing first author quality work that was stolen from him, it reestablishes his credibility." "Maybe. Or maybe it makes him look like someone who allowed himself to be exploited, who didn't have the backbone to stand up for proper attribution." The words stung because they echoed my own fears, but I pushed forward. "Then we make sure the narrative is clear. Victoria is the villain here, not Marcus. She manipulated and exploited him. He's a victim, not a co-conspirator." Dr. Rodriguez put her glasses back on and looked at the evidence spread across the table. "This is a lot to process. I need to think about it, maybe consult with some trusted colleagues discreetly." My heart sank. "You're not going to help me?" "I didn't say that." She met my eyes. "But this is complicated. If I'm going to put my own reputation on the line by supporting these accusations, I need to be certain we can prove everything and that we're prepared for the fallout. Victoria has powerful allies, including Dr. James Whitmore, who chairs the foundation that funds her research. Going after her means going after people with significant influence."
I don't care how powerful her allies are. Maybe you should. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm. I admire your determination, Margaret, I really do. But you need to understand what you're up against. Victoria didn't build her position through research alone. She's a master networker, a brilliant politician, someone who's cultivated relationships with everyone who matters in this field. If we accuse her of fraud and can't make it stick, she'll destroy not just you, but anyone who helped you. So we make it stick. That's easier said than done. Academic misconduct investigations are complicated. There are processes, committees, policies, and Victoria will have lawyers, supporters, people willing to testify that she deserves first authorship because of her intellectual contributions, even if Marcus did the hands-on work. I felt my determination wavering. Maybe this was too big for me. Maybe I was just a foolish old woman who'd gotten herself in over her head. But then I remembered Victoria's face as she dismissed me as extra weight. I remembered Marcus's hunched shoulders and the way his publication record had evaporated. I remembered I'd survived worse things than Victoria Ashford. Will you help me or not? I asked directly.
Dr. Rodriguez gathered up the documents and carefully put them back in order. Then she looked at me with something that might have been respect. I'll help you, but we do this carefully, methodically, and we build an airtight case before we make any accusations. That means more evidence, more documentation, and probably weeks of investigation. I can do that. And it means you need to stay away from Victoria. If she realizes you're investigating her, she'll take steps to protect herself and destroy evidence. You need to act like nothing's changed, like you're still just Marcus's disappointed mother who's been properly put in her place. The thought of pretending to accept Victoria's cruelty made me feel sick, but I nodded. I can do that too. Okay. Dr. Rodriguez stood up, leaving her business card on the table. Call me on my personal cell, not the institute number. And Margaret, be careful. You're playing a dangerous game with someone who's very good at destroying people who get in her way. After she left, I sat alone at the corner table with my cold coffee and my folder of evidence, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. I had an ally now, someone from inside the institute who believed me, who understood the implications of what Victoria was doing. But I also had confirmation that Victoria was even more dangerous than I'd realized. She had power, connections, resources to fight back. This wasn't going to be quick or easy. But I didn't care how long it took. Victoria had called me extra weight, something to be cut loose and discarded. Now I was going to show her exactly how much weight I could carry and how hard I could drop it on her perfectly constructed life. The pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Rodriguez and I worked together to build our case. She'd agreed to help, but she insisted we do everything by the book. Careful, documented, unassailable. We met 3 more times at different coffee shops around Seattle, always choosing places far from the institute where we were unlikely to run into anyone Victoria knew. Each time, Dr. Rodriguez brought new information and I brought new evidence. She told me things about the department that painted an even uglier picture of Victoria's behavior. She's territorial about her research, Dr. Rodriguez explained during our second meeting. No one else in the department is allowed to work on cellular aging projects. She claims it's her specialty, her niche, and that having multiple people pursuing similar research would be redundant. But that's not how science works, is it? I thought multiple researchers investigating the same questions was good. Replication, different approaches, that kind of thing. You're absolutely right. Competition and replication are essential to good science. But Victoria has convinced the department head that her work is so advanced and specialized that having other researchers in the same space would be inefficient. And the department head believes her? Dr. Rodriguez grimaced. Dr. Patterson is brilliant at biochemistry, but terrible at departmental politics. Victoria runs circles around him. She schedules her meetings with him after his long days when he's tired. She brings data and charts that make her arguments look unassailable. And she's very good at framing things as being in the department's best interest.
So she's effectively monopolized an entire research area. Exactly, which means she controls all the funding, all the publications, all the credit for any breakthroughs in that field, at least within our institute. I thought about this for a moment. What about Marcus? He works on cellular aging too, obviously. That's the clever part. Officially, Marcus's position is to support Victoria's research program. His job description explicitly states that he coordinates research activities for the Cellular Aging Project, singular, Victoria's project. So when he does the work and she takes credit, it's technically within the bounds of his job responsibilities. That seems like a convenient arrangement. Very convenient. For Victoria. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her own documents of files. I've been digging into the timeline of when this arrangement started. Marcus was hired as a regular research coordinator 3 years ago. He was working on his own projects, building his own publication record. Then Victoria was recruited from Johns Hopkins about 2 years ago with a lot of fanfare. She was this rising star they'd managed to attract with a generous package. And Marcus's independent research stopped when? About 6 months after Victoria arrived. There was a department reorganization, supposedly to improve efficiency and collaboration. Marcus's position was redefined as supporting the cellular aging research program, which Victoria led. His own projects were transferred to other researchers or shelved. The pieces were falling into place. She engineered it. She saw Marcus was doing good work and found a way to claim it as her own. That's my suspicion, but I haven't found proof of deliberate manipulation versus just unfortunate organizational decisions. Dr. Rodriguez looked frustrated. That's the problem with academic politics. Things that look suspicious from the outside can usually be explained as normal institutional processes on paper.
What about the Whitmore-Castellan Foundation funding? I asked. I looked into that and found it was chaired by Dr. James Whitmore, who seems close to Victoria. Dr. Rodriguez's expression grew even grimmer. That's another piece of the puzzle. Victoria's funding comes exclusively from that foundation, about $200,000 per year for the past 18 months. That's substantial money, enough to fully support her research program, including Marcus's salary. So, Dr. Whitmore is essentially paying for Victoria's operation? Yes. And here's what makes it interesting. Dr. Whitmore served on the hiring committee that recruited Victoria to the Institute. He was instrumental in convincing the administration to make her a generous offer. They're connected. They're definitely connected. I just don't know exactly how or why. Dr. Whitmore's foundation supports several researchers, but Victoria gets more money and more consistent funding than anyone else. She also gets invitations to present at conferences that Whitmore organizes, authorship on review papers that Whitmore coordinates, and prominent positions in professional organizations where Whitmore has influence. That's not just mentorship, I said slowly. That's patronage. Exactly. Victoria has a powerful patron who's invested in her success, which means if we accuse her of misconduct, we're also implicitly questioning Whitmore's judgment in supporting her. He'll fight back hard to protect his own reputation. The scope of what I was taking on kept expanding. It wasn't just Victoria anymore. It was an entire network of power and influence, all invested in protecting her position. But I'd come too far to turn back now. What do we do next? I asked. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a list she'd been preparing. We need more evidence. Specifically, we need to prove that Victoria's authorship claims are fraudulent. That means demonstrating that Marcus did substantially more work than a middle author position would suggest. I have the draft manuscripts showing him as first author. That's good, but not conclusive. Victoria could argue that first authorship in draft form doesn't mean anything, that the intellectual contribution that matters happened during revision and publication, and that she provided that contribution. We need evidence of Marcus's specific work, lab notebooks, data analysis files, email correspondence discussing the research, anything that shows he was the primary driver of the work. Most of that would be on the Institute's servers, which you've already accessed. Dr. Rodriguez gave me a knowing look. How did you manage that, by the way? I'd been dreading this question. I guessed Marcus's password. That's illegal, you know. Unauthorized access to computer systems. Are you gonna report me? She shook her head. No,
But you need to understand that any evidence obtained illegally won't be admissible in a formal investigation. We need legitimate access to that material. How do we get that? We file a formal complaint with the Institute's Research Integrity Office. Once a complaint is filed, they're required to investigate. That investigation includes reviewing all relevant files and documents, which gives us legal access to everything on the servers. But won't that tip Victoria off? Won't she destroy evidence? She might try, but the Research Integrity Office will preserve copies of all relevant files as soon as the investigation starts. It's standard procedure. And if she's caught destroying evidence, that's an additional violation that strengthens our case. I thought about this. So we file a complaint, let the official investigation proceed, and use that process to legitimately access all the evidence. Exactly. But Margaret, you need to understand, this process takes time, months, possibly a year or more. Academic misconduct investigations are thorough and deliberate. There are interviews, committee reviews, opportunities for the accused to respond. It's not quick. I don't care how long it takes. And there's something else. Dr. Rodriguez's voice became very serious. The complaint has to come from someone at the Institute, someone with standing to make accusations about research conducted here. It can't come from you. You're not affiliated with the institution. My heart sank. So all this evidence I've gathered is useless? Not useless, but it needs to be presented by someone internal, someone willing to put their name on the complaint and face whatever backlash comes. Will you do it? She was silent for a long moment. That's what I've been struggling with. If I file this complaint and it's not sustained, my career at this institute is effectively over. Victoria will make sure of it. Even if the complaint is sustained, I'll still face retaliation from her supporters. I understand if you can't. I didn't say I wouldn't. I said I need to be sure we can win before I put everything on the line. She met my eyes. Give me 2 more weeks. Let me gather more evidence discreetly. Let me sound out some other colleagues who might support this. Then we'll decide whether to move forward. It wasn't the immediate action I wanted, but it was reasonable. Dr. Rodriguez was risking her entire career to help me. The least I could do was give her time to prepare. 2 weeks, I agreed. As I drove home that evening, I felt both frustrated and energized. The investigation was moving forward, but slowly. We had evidence, but we needed more. We had one ally, but we needed others. And through it all, I had to pretend nothing was wrong. I had to continue being the dismissed, humiliated mother who had been properly put in her place. The hardest part was dealing with Marcus. He called on Sunday, as he always did, and I had to act normal, had to listen to him talk about his work that Victoria was stealing without saying anything.
"How are you, Mom?" he asked, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. He hadn't called since the faculty mixer, hadn't addressed what Victoria had said to me, hadn't apologized or defended me. "I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you?" "Busy. We're preparing for a conference presentation next month. Victoria's nervous about it." Not "we're nervous," not "I'm nervous." Victoria. "That's exciting," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "What's the presentation about?" He launched into an explanation of the research, cellular aging mechanisms, telomere preservation, all the technical details that flew over my head. But I listened carefully anyway, because somewhere in his description was confirmation that he'd done the work. "That sounds incredibly complex," I said when he finished. "You must have put in a lot of hours on that research." There was a pause. "Well, it's Victoria's project. I just help coordinate the experiments and data collection." "But you're doing the actual work." Another pause. Longer this time. "That's my job, Mom. I'm a research coordinator. I coordinate research." "And she gets the credit?" The silence that followed was painful. "It's complicated," he said finally. "You wouldn't understand how academic research works." The dismissal stung, but I kept my voice calm. You're probably right. I'm just a former school secretary. What would I know about work and credit and fairness? Mom, please don't start. I'm not starting anything, Marcus. I'm just listening to you explain your job. We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt hollow. When we hung up, I sat holding my phone and feeling the weight of everything I knew and couldn't say. My son was being exploited, manipulated, and professionally destroyed, and he either couldn't see it or had been convinced he deserved it. But I could see it, and with Dr. Rodriguez's help, I was going to make everyone else see it too. Victoria had called me extra weight. Soon she'd learn that sometimes the heaviest weights are the ones you can't see coming until they crush you. 2 weeks turned into 3 as Dr. Rodriguez and I gathered every piece of evidence we could find. But finally, on a cold Monday morning in February, we were ready. Dr. Rodriguez filed the formal complaint with the Research Integrity Office, presenting everything we'd compiled: the draft manuscripts showing Marcus as first author, the published versions with Victoria first, the lab notebooks proving Marcus had conducted the experiments, email correspondence where Victoria explicitly instructed Marcus on research protocols while claiming his work as her own intellectual contribution. The investigation launched immediately. The Research Integrity Office moved faster than I'd expected, preserving files, scheduling interviews, notifying Victoria that she was under investigation for research misconduct. I got the call from Marcus that same afternoon. His voice was panicked, desperate. "Mom, what did you do?" I told the truth. I said calmly, "I reported academic fraud." "You had no right. You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly. Victoria has been stealing your work for 18 months, and I have proof." "She didn't steal anything. It's her research program, her funding, her intellectual framework." "But your hands doing the experiments, your mind analyzing the data, your words writing the manuscripts. That makes you the primary researcher, not her." The silence on the other end was deafening. "You're going to destroy both of us," he said finally. "Victoria's career, my career, everything." "I'm saving your career. She destroyed it when she started taking credit for your work." "You don't know what you're talking about." His voice cracked with emotion. "Victoria gave me opportunities I never would have had. She included me in her research program when I was just a coordinator going nowhere." "She exploited you. She saw a talented researcher and found a way to use your labor while claiming your achievements." "That's not how it happened. You're making her sound like a villain when she's been nothing but supportive." I wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he saw the truth. But instead, I took a deep breath. "Marcus, I love you. And because I love you, I can't watch you be destroyed by someone who sees you as extra weight, someone who literally called your own mother extra weight in front of your colleagues." "She didn't mean it like that." "Yes, she did. And you know it. You've just been pretending otherwise because admitting the truth means admitting you've wasted 18 months of your career on someone who was using you." He hung up. The investigation moved quickly once it started. Dr. Rodriguez kept me updated on everything happening behind the scenes. The Research Integrity Committee interviewed Marcus first. He defended Victoria, as I'd expected, claiming she deserved first authorship because of her intellectual contribution and oversight of the research program. But when they showed him his own draft manuscripts with his name first, when they presented his lab notebooks and data analysis files, when they documented the hundreds of hours he'd spent conducting experiments while Victoria was traveling to conferences, his story began to crumble.
They interviewed other researchers in the department. Several admitted they'd noticed Victoria's unusually high productivity and wondered how she managed it. One confessed she'd seen Marcus working late nights and weekends in the lab, conducting experiments that appeared in Victoria's papers weeks later. They interviewed Dr. James Whitmore about the Whitmore-Castellan Foundation funding. He defended Victoria vigorously, calling her a brilliant researcher whose work would revolutionize the field. But when pressed about his oversight of how the funding was being used, he admitted he'd relied entirely on Victoria's reports and hadn't independently verified that she was conducting the research herself. Most damning of all, they found emails. Victoria had been careless in her confidence, sending messages to Marcus with explicit instructions about experiments to conduct, data to collect, papers to draft, all while planning which conferences she'd attend to present her findings. In one email that Dr. Rodriguez showed me, Victoria had written, "Marcus, I need the telomere data analysis finished by Friday so I can incorporate it into my presentation. Make sure the figures are publication quality. And don't mention to anyone else that you're doing this work. It's better if people think I'm hands-on in the lab. It maintains my credibility." 6 weeks after the investigation began, the Research Integrity Committee released their findings. Victoria Ashford had committed systematic research misconduct by claiming primary authorship on 7 papers where the evidence clearly showed she had not performed the primary research work. She had misrepresented her contributions, taken credit for work performed by Margaret Chen, and violated the Institute's policies on research attribution and academic integrity. The consequences were swift and devastating. All 7 papers were flagged for retraction or correction, pending review by the journals that had published them. Victoria's position at the Institute was terminated immediately. Her funding from the Whitmore-Castellan Foundation was suspended, pending their own internal investigation. And her name was reported to relevant professional organizations, effectively destroying her reputation in the field. Dr. Whitmore resigned as chair of the foundation rather than face questions about his oversight failures. And Marcus was vindicated but shattered. I didn't hear from my son for 2 months after Victoria's exposure. Dr. Rodriguez told me he was working with the Institute to correct the authorship on the papers, going through the painful process of having his contributions properly recognized while watching his career become associated with a massive scandal. When he finally called, it was late on a Sunday night. "Mom?" His voice was small, broken in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. For defending her. For not seeing what was happening." "I know." She told me I wasn't good enough to be first author, that my work was competent but not exceptional, and that her intellectual framework and guidance were what made it publication worthy. She made me believe I was lucky just to be included on the papers at all. She lied to you. I know that now. The committee showed me everything, all the evidence of my work, all the emails where she took credit for things I did. I couldn't see it while it was happening. She was so confident, so certain that she deserved the credit that I started believing her. That's how manipulation works, Marcus. It makes you doubt your own reality. There was a long silence. Victoria's gone. She moved back east, I think. Last I heard, she was trying to find a position at a private biotech company, but no one will touch her after this. Good. Mom, did you know it would destroy her completely when you started investigating? I thought about Victoria's face as she'd called me
extra weight. I thought about her predatory smile and her calculated cruelty. I thought about how she'd tried to cut me out of my son's life while stealing his career. Yes, I said simply. I knew exactly what I was doing. You should be angry at me. Are you? No. You saved me. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to see it. 3 months later, the corrected papers were published, with Marcus as first author and Victoria's name removed entirely. Marcus was offered a promotion to senior research scientist with his own independent research program. And me? I'm still in my modest house in Bridgeport, still driving my old Honda Civic, still just a former school secretary with no fancy degrees. But I'm not extra weight. I'm the woman who took down Victoria Ashford and saved her son's career. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.